Hey guys, and welcome back to Joko Yo. It is a podcast about all things Johnston County history. I used to teach this course, Johnston County history, in some of Johnston County's public schools, and it was lovely. I loved it. Had some of the best times in a classroom I've ever had. Some of you may have even taken the course, which some of you have actually subscribed to the podcast that took the course, and I appreciate that. And if that's the case, you've probably heard some of these stories before, and I know some of them you probably have. But this is a way for me to take this knowledge out and share it with more people than the ones I could get in high school. Basically, if you're not 15 or through the age of 18, and if I have not taught you in the past, then you may not even know about these places and these events and these people. If you live in Johnston County, North Carolina, have ever lived here, you may have gone through your whole life and not known this stuff. Well, this is the place that you live, and it's just another way for me to share what I know with my fellow citizens. So Benson is going to have something called Mule Days in September. And it's been happening in the late part of September every year since roughly about the late 1940s. It was cooked up by two guys in Benson, North Carolina. One was Nowell Smith and the other was Willis McClam. So you see, one of them, Willis McClam, was a livestock dealer in the 1940s, and it was at a time when we still sort of had like livestock. Benson, like most towns around the area, were farming towns, and really, even though there were horses and stuff, the tractors were starting to come in, and that's the way that farming goes. That's the way everything goes. Technology begins to outpace the way things have always been done, the traditional ways. So the mule, if you don't really know, a couple things about it, is a cross between a horse and a donkey. It is supposed to be sterile. It also is supposed to be pretty stupid and stubborn. That's hence one of the catchphrases, stubborn like a mule. I once saw someone ding a mule in the face with a shovel one time to get it to move. Yeah, that's definitely animal cruelty, but his explanation was that, well, it moved, didn't it? So maybe that's, yeah. Anyway, I don't think I'd want to do that. But either way, so Mule Days began from a thought process from a couple of people, those two gentlemen, that, really perhaps saw the way of using mules and horses as draft animals, as plow pullers, as the big muscle of a farm. Their days were beginning to dissipate, were beginning to dwindle. And maybe this is a way of keeping it alive for these two guys. In fact, one of them, Mr. Willis McClam, actually said that was the exact purpose of Mule Days, was to keep alive and celebrate the history of the mule. Now, he, again, as a livestock dealer, he sort of knew what he was talking about. So where'd this idea of a celebration of the mule even come from? And how in the world is it Benson? I mean, didn't someone already think of this? You would think someone would have thought of this. Now, well, maybe some did. There's apparently a Mule Days in Arizona as well, but I don't think it quite draws the crowds that we pull in Benson. For example, over this 4-day holiday, this town of 4,000 people, to be generous, brings in about 40,000, and some estimates have said as much as 50,000 people. Y'all, that's a lot of people. And it's not, like, okay, maybe it's a bit controversial, but I'm not so certain that all 40,000 of those people that are coming actually are there to revere the history of the mule. If you've ever been to Mule Days, there's not a whole lot of mules around. Now, there used to be a celebration, and they still have mule contests, ugliest mule, oldest mule, that kind of stuff. But if you go today, say 2019, you're pretty much not seeing a bunch of mules. You're going to see a lot of horses, but you're not really seeing a bunch of mules. So that leads me to think these days, as the celebration of the mules begins to, well, Mule Days begins to be less about the celebration of the mules, then what is it becoming a celebration of? Again, as a boy that grew up in Benson, and my parents still live in Benson, North Carolina, and having grown up around Mule Days, having gone to parades and the carnival and the street dance one night when I wasn't supposed to, when I was 16, and kind of snuck through, and seeing seeing a horse get pulled over for drunkenness by a policeman. I'm not kidding. I don't know if the rider was drunk, but the horse certainly was. He was weaving and stumbling. The horse, who gives a horse so much beer that the horse starts to, I mean, is it walking drunk? It's not driving. I don't know. I've never seen a car drunk, but I've seen someone drunk try to drive. I've never, horse got, I've seen this. I was behind the horse. The horse got pulled over by a policeman years ago for drunkenness. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you can't really issue a horse a citation, that the citation was issued for the rider, but y'all, a horse is not going to weave back and forth and stumble like a dude coming back from a bender at East Carolina, in the early 90s. The horse was drunk. So that's just my 2 cents. But as a guy that has always been around Mule Days, always seen Mule Days, again, the parades, the smells, the festival air, and the other things in the air that are not quite festive, like having to smell, bovine and equine poop for 2 weeks afterwards. Even if it's cleaned off the streets, you still smell it. There's no leaving it alone. And growing up in Benson, when you have to wake up one morning and see some drunk dude passed out on your lawn, and so on like a Sunday morning, you're like, who's that guy? Still, it's been central to Benson's experience every September since the 1950s. But again, I think of the 1950s, it was a celebration of mules. I've seen pictures, mules here, mules there, Miss Benson kissing the nose of the mule. But again, not seeing that many mules these days. I wonder if we swapped out one type of jackass for another one. Because what I see now these days are a whole lot fewer mules and a whole lot more drunken people just acting as if they have no common sense whatsoever. I completely get it. You got to let your hair loose, but it seems like this is a celebration of a different kind of jackass. Not everybody that goes to Jackass. I take my kid sometimes, and my kid loves to see the horses and loves to see all of the parades. He's sort of seen it as well, but at the same time, if you've ever gone, they're there clogging up the roads. And I don't know if it's a celebration of a different kind of jackass, and there are 40,000 of those kinds of jackasses. There's a whole lot of jackassed things that are going on in Benson for 4 days. Now, I'm really cool with celebrating the mule. That's fantastic. All these little towns around this area have holidays. Like, for example, Coates has the Farmer's Day. Even though there are fewer and fewer farmers, you still celebrate them. But the guys at the holidays there to celebrate are really not there as much anymore. Used to have, we have Acorn, the Acorn Festival in Four Oaks. Well, they actually have, trees in Four Oaks, so, that's legitimate. You got the Ham and Yam in Smithfield. Yes, there are hams. Yes, there are yams. It makes perfect sense to celebrate that. Hey, but I think you have these small towns all around the country that like to have their local festivals, and I think that's wonderful. Heck, Smithfield used to have something called the Better Baby Fair. what the heck does that even mean? Is it a celebration for better babies than there are like bad babies? Is it trying to make your baby better? And if so, how is taking your baby to a festival going to make it any better? You know, in Smithfield, at the time, had dirt roads. So if you have a better baby fair, what about the worst baby? Is there a worse baby fair? I don't know, but that holiday has gone away, thankfully. Well, then I'm sure there's a place for it. Like Mule Days. Mule Days. I love Mule Days. There are lots of people who don't love Mule Days. I don't like going through Benson on Mule Days. I try to avoid the area absolutely, completely. The traffic is one issue. There are a bunch of other issues too. Growing up there, I have a complicated love-hate relationship with the event. Lots of people love it. So I want to also bring this to mind. If Benson has a 4-day holiday in which all kinds of stuff happens, and y'all, I'm telling you, if you've not gone, if you want to see just some example of what humankind, just use your imagination, what humankind is able to accomplish, and you use your imagination, whichever way you want to take it, Mule Days is the place to see it. Bunches of stuff happens there. It almost makes I could put it this way. I can imagine some people will wake up from their 4-day Mule Day party and be ashamed of themselves. And honestly, I would be one of them. I remember being a teenager and waking up and after the 4-day holiday, being ashamed of some of the stuff I did, but also laughing at it as well. Well, if you do things that you're ashamed of, then maybe you need a way to atone for it. And maybe that's sort of Benson's thing, you know? Maybe that's sort of Benson's thing. It has a 4-day holiday in which anything goes, and then in June, there's a festival in which people from all over the country seem to come to Benson since 1921 to sing gospel music. It's a weekend full of praying and singing gospel music, and it's free to the public. So you know what? I don't know which way it goes. Is the gospel music supposed to help us atone for what we did during Mule Days? Or is Mule Days sort of like hey, we're going to party up now because we've already atoned for what we're going to do back in June? Well, so I don't know. That's a theological question I'm not prepared to answer. In either case, Benson has in June a North Carolina gospel singing. It's a singing convention held at the Grove every single June, and you're going to hear some really pretty music. There's competition, there's duets, there's groups, there's live music, there's tape music, and it's really well performed. And when I was a kid, I actually performed in one of those, and I was 5 years old as part of a youth choir. That happens in June. And then July goes off. You have a July 4th firework like most small American towns in the South. And then August comes and everyone just basically melts because it's so hot that you can't walk barefoot unless you just have those feet of stone. And then September comes around and it's Mule Days. And that's whenever pretty much anything goes. The rest of the year, Benson's like a normal place. But maybe it needs the one holiday to atone for the other, and the one holiday which you can do crazy stuff so that you can justify the weekend of gospel music. I don't know which way it goes, but Benson definitely, its holidays are almost bipolar in some ways, but it is home, and for all of its warts, and Mule Days is definitely a big old ugly fat wart on the tip of the nose. It also has its pretty festivals in June, and the town is like an ideal Main Street looking kind of venue. So there's Benson in a nutshell. Mule Days, by the way, I should also mention this: before Noah Smith and before Mr. Willis McClam dreamed up Mule Days, and I said before, Mr. Willis McClam was a livestock dealer. He was not the only one. Why not other towns? Well, the thing is, if you, again, have ever been through Benson, Benson is at the crossroads of several highways. Now, this is, of course, way before I-95 and I-40 had their junction. There are several roads that came through Benson. In fact, the railroad, one of the major railroads on the East Coast came through Benson. And Benson was a really, really big depot station, which is sort of required for people to get off. It's one of those ones that you had to stop at. Well, given that it was at the center of so many destinations and so many transportation already sort of convened there together, Benson was known way before 1921 as one of the premier livestock, places in the Southeast. So, honestly, if you were to go to Georgia, if you were to go to Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, there's no doubt. In fact, there's evidence to prove it that somebody near you in one of those 4 states has heard of the livestock dealers in Benson. Benson was a big deal. They were known for their mules and their livestock dealers. Benson was the spot. Benson was the spot for livestock auctions. Benson was the stop. And so, before there were mule days in Benson, particularly in Benson, there were mules. And, of course, you have to have feed, so we have Mule City feed. But Benson was Mule City long before there was mule days. The town was established in the late 1800s, so that makes it by 1921 roughly 60 years old. And, again, at the heart of a pretty big transportation junction, even for the time. So in the 1880s, definitely we're still using, most people are agricultural. Most people still lived in farms and on farms. Benson was just a town that you came to get what you needed and then go back to your farm. Some people lived in town, definitely, because you have to have services. But really, almost everyone in the area were agriculturalists of some sort or another. And most people don't have tractors in 1880. They do exist in the 1880s, but they're going to be like really, 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 really expensive. They still are, but really, really expensive. B, not nearly as dependable as a mule, which again, as stubborn as they are, very dependable. C, how in the world are you going to get one? You got to have a tractor dealer. If most people are still using mules and horses, they're not going to go buy a tractor. Besides, tractors break down. Mules might break down, sure. Horses might break down, but horses tend to make babies, and and you could, make you can feed a horse, whereas a tractor needs gas, and there were not really like gas stations in Benson, but there were feed stores in Benson. So, 1880s. Benson's agricultural, just like Clayton, just like Smithfield, just like Selma, just like Kenly, just like every other town, 4 Oaks in Johnston County. We're all agricultural. Most of the Southeast is. 1890, same way. Early 1900s, same way. 1910, same way. 1920s, even you can see the census records show how many people were farmers in Benson, and it's almost everybody. Now, I can also attest to the fact that my grandmother in the 1930s, when she was a young girl coming to school in Benson, she said that not only did she ride to town from their farm, pretty close to town, in a horse and buggy, everyone drove to town in a horse and buggy. You're starting to see some cars in Benson. There are not many. The records show that in Johnston County, really, as an entire political unit, the first actually seen automobile I'm sure there was another one before, possibly, but the first seen automobile in this entire county was in 1898. Which, if you just look at the years, that's really just like 32 years before the 1930s, when my grandmother was riding a horse and buggy. So it's not going to be really widely dispersed, and that was in Smithfield. It was a 1898 Rio, by the way, REO. It was definitely not a Kia. It was REO, not RIO. And 1930s, people were doing horses and mules and buggies. But when you start to look at the 1940s, especially, something really starts to kick in. The tractors get less expensive, get to be where if you're still doing mules and horses, you're starting to lose market share, which of course obviously has not stopped since then. And farmers are getting more and more needing to have mechanized equipment and fewer horses and mules. And so by 1941, the number of mules and horses versus the number of tractors in Benson has done, and in all of Johnston County, has done a complete flip-flop from where it was 20 years prior, thereby making the town of Mules, Mule City, less about mules than it had ever been. The era of the mule was effectively over and was dwindling by the day. By 1941, when Mr. Smith and Mr. McClam needed a way to celebrate Benson's heritage of being a livestock stop. So, the birth of Mule Days was in a way to remember what had been in a time when what's coming was coming, the coming of mechanized agriculture was coming quickly. So, if you just happen to visit Benson, North Carolina this year to check out Benson's Mule Days, do know first this. It started out as a celebration of the mule in a time when the mule was going away as an essential part of the Benson economy. Secondly, I suppose, know that Benson Mule Days is 40,000 people, again, on a pretty conservative side. Benson, built for 4,000 people, is going to be jam-packed crazy. And C, it's going to be crazy not just because of the numbers, but because of who is there. And who is there? Not all, but a lot. When it used to be a holiday for Jackasses, well, Jackasses is what you're going to get. Not all of them, but a lot of them. You want Jackasses, here they are. May not be what you were expecting. So, still, it's worth seeing once. Heck, it's maybe even worth seeing twice. And I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and there's another coming later this week. Thanks, y'all. Be good. Hey, and feel free anytime you wish to leave a voice message with your own stories, any kind of, maybe I mispronounced a name, I know I do sometimes, but if you have your own stories or if you just want to leave a voice message, record it, send it to me, who knows, I would love to hear your own voice on this program. Thanks, y'all. Until next time, be good.